Hello and welcome to ThePrint. Today I'm going to interview somebody that you already actually know a lot about. Across social media platforms, this person has around 7 million followers. He wrote this amazing book which you could find from the most posh bookstores to probably every street market bookstore. And the title itself was so ingenious that everybody was buying it. I think single-handedly, this book made a lot of youngsters take up reading itself. So, hello, welcome, Ankur Warikoo.
Thank you so much. I think that's a lovely introduction. I love that.
Actually, to be fair, the first time I was working in Delhi, Connaught Place, and people push you to buy books. And I remember how I got the book for the first time was somebody telling me this book, and I remember being very intrigued. So, how was that? We go back to the first book and come back to
Sure.
the latest.
Sure.
So, how did the title come about?
The title has actually been my life motto for almost 10 plus years now. And the backstory for this, Tina, is in 2011, two of my closest friends on my birthday gifted me this cool poster that said "Do a big shit." And that point I was like, hey, this is an old poster. And I just summed it very nice and I put it on my table. I used to stare at it every day. And overnight I realized that it was actually how I wanted to live my life, which is do it. That means action greater than thought. I would love to be in the moment, getting things done, as I can say, searching, cutting, and so on. But ethic, which means something that's bigger than yourself, and shit is you're having fun while you're doing it. And that suddenly became my motto. And when Chiki and I were working on the first book and we were thinking of the first name, it was just a very obvious thing.
So, in the first book, you were also detailing about your own life journey, the lessons you've had over that, right? So all of us somewhere we begin, in school with, okay, this is what I want to become. The options are very limited when you're in India. Doctor, engineer, that's about it. And some few stray kids who get to go to commerce and arts. So how was that like to put it out there? Because like I said, I think, with the sales of the book, like simply by numbers, I can say that so many people end up reading that book and, you just have to look for the reviews and everybody saying, okay, this is a book I did not expect. In a way, it's also saying things that I know, but somebody else is saying it. So where did that idea come from? That you basically say things that people probably know. It doesn't need like somebody to tell it out and you sort of did it for it.
Because frankly, that's what books did to me as well. When I was growing up, of course, I was fascinated by books of a very different kind. Growing up in Delhi, and then your comics were your first introduction. The Chacha Chaudhary, Pidindi, Pinku, and all those. I forget, Super Kawana Group, Nagraj. And then you start graduating, and people tell you, oh, there's something called Archie's comic. Okay, cool. You look it up, and then, oh, Riverin, so cool. And then you go into Asterix and Tintin. Then you start graduating to some more serious things. But the best books that I've always remembered are not the ones where I've done something new, but the ones who put words in a way that I always wish I could. And oh my God, this out. I spent all my years, and this is such a simple way of narrating the same thing. And the second thing was because I benefited so much from books. I always felt that this was unfortunate that entire generation was being raised without the appreciation for reading. That's why I wanted to combine the two things. And that's why I wanted to write a book that you could finish very easily. I wanted to write a book that even if it did finish, you would feel like you drew something from it. And a book that made it very cool to share that they read a book. So it was very clearly and cleverly, I would say, targeted to the Gen Zs who do not read as much, would never share something on their Instagram story about a book. But something, this was this whole thing, it was very Instagrammable and steady, lovely, yellow color and so on. That cool?
So when you said that this is structured, marketed in a certain way. So from the font, because I simply talked about the font of it, from that way with recent book. Even that, when you put it lot font, the font as well and the way it will be structured, because it's a very handy book. Like on traveling, I can just put it anywhere I take it. We always have this thing about these bosses being like, we just think about space everyone. I easily fit it. Like I actually took the book to one of my recent trips as well. So I was wondering, like, how much of it was you trying to make sure that actually people did think up? And you're right. I mean, I would feel like, briefly when I was teaching, I was trying to tell people, please read. And then I was still getting horrified and nobody did everything. But this is, like I said, a book that everybody was talking about and reading. So how much of the font, the color, and, generally all of that, how much were you a part of?
So I take credit for the things that I did and pass off the credit to the people to the actual book. My job was get the content, Right.
Yeah.
And it had to be content that was very easily consumable. It was something which was limited to a page at best two. And it had to have a structure without structure. The book can be very disconcerting for somebody who reads because it's like, yeah, right? There's no structure. You literally move from one thought to another to another to another. But that was that idea. Because if you can navigate through that, you would just get a lot of things to reflect upon. Once that was done, I said, hey, Chiki, my publisher, please take it over. She's a master at this. So she came up with the size. She came up with the fact that it should be hardcover and not paperback. Thank God for that. She came up with the fact that it should be yellow. I loved it when I saw it. I'm also colorblind, so I don't even fully appreciate colors. So for me, the first thing was, oh, this looks like love at first sight. Let's go with it. And I love the boldness of the epic blah, blah, blah. And of course, in hindsight, all of it seems to have more. But for dick work, I would say that somebody else did that.
It's actually coming back, since you also somebody who was known a lot for content creation. And that's the space where there's still debates going on, right? Like when people hear the word influencers, and it's immediately considered an insult. How many people have to say, I'm not one, I'm not one, because it's considered such a type of insult as well. What is so on intellectuals? Like, again, already behavior. So I wanted to know how much of your experience in creating content, because there the bandwidth of people has dramatically reduced. But even people who used to read a lot now realize that they can't get through a book, they can't even get through a chapter or a short story. We're so used to the visual medium. So how, in the middle of that, to write a book, wasn't it very daunting? Because you know that there's a generation that absolutely doesn't like reading. There's a generation that's struggling to keep up with the reading habit. And then you're writing a book, which again said is not really structured. It's not a fiction. So the way we again look at stories, it's not fiction. So what was the challenge like, and what was it thought?
It frankly wasn't challenging, but the reason it wasn't is because I actively write every day. I love writing. I've written for the longest time that I know myself. So writing is something that has given a lot of structure to my works. And I often say this: to become a good speaker, you have to first be able to write up as a touch to channelize your mind and make it concise and specific. So writing wasn't a problem. Actually, nothing was a problem. It was just the choice that I had to make. Am I writing? And you made this excellent point. At 42, I come from some schools where there's a certain aura around them and so on. So I could easily write for that audience that would love me, respect me, own me as their own. Oh my God, this lifeless dude who pajamas and so on. Or I could write for a very different crowd, which is the 18 to 24-year-olds, the ones that I create content for. Knowing for a fact that this would never win any literary award, this would never get appreciated for anything or chattering. It would most likely be rebuked by people who genuinely love books and are active readers. But I couldn't care less because I'm speaking to a very different audience. And that was the only hard decision that I had to make. But in my head, I already made the decision with my content. So extending that to a book wasn't that hard. And then it was just, it took its time. And COVID certainly had, in that sense at least, because your time on your hands, then you could attend to it. So it did take a fair bit of time to write it, but once it was there, okay.
So the second book, which if you can know, it's going, again, a lot of people are again talking about it, because people who loved the first one would want to know, okay, what is next? So there are 36 questions. I would have a wild number. Because I'm like, why? Because I was reading. And secondly, it's a very, I was reminded of the whole time when I was in school and used to be the Socratic model of teaching, right? Like the teacher-student thing. And I was thinking about it a lot while I was reading. And also, because you mentioned there as well about the writing bit of it, there's a whole chunk dedicated to talking about channel thoughts as in writing. Do you think it's actually more of a struggle for the generation that you're talking about, 18 to 24? Because this is a generation that have actually had the most amount of online classes, actually had to learn to be more, visual, virtual friendly, as opposed to us who really have to write. Right? So you were telling them, oh, you should write more.
The hope is not to shift everyone. The hope is that even if 1% shifts, then it really could shift because their base is so big. There was no method because the 36, it was actually a derivation, not something that we targeted. We just started compiling the frequently asked questions that I get asked. And the first draft was 80,000 words. And I think there were 58 questions. And we just went through it, and then we suddenly figured, some were not as important as the others, some were just superfluous, some were repetitive, some were redundant. But we kept pruning to come to this point. I also wanted to, and this is so against how I live my life, I also wanted to be somewhat prescriptive. And I thus start with the disclaimer that this book will hopefully be the most useless book you will buy, because it's filled with this one thing I hate in life: prescriptions. I don't think there is a set way to live life, and I don't think you should try and follow anybody's life and hope that if you were to replicate those steps, you would end up where they are. That's never happening. But my hope is that through the answers and this student-teacher conversation, it helps you come up with your own answer. And that's the only hope it's tell. And I'm hoping that these 36 questions will land.
But why specifically a teacher-student sort of relationship, which was like, I'm just wondering, because since the audience is, much younger, wouldn't it have also made sense it's some other sort of relationship? Or to call it something else, maybe?
We gave it a lot of thought. So there were two inspirations. One is courage to be disliked, whereas a student and a philosopher, of course, Plato's Socrates was perpetually playing on my mind. But I think it became very evident for me that it should be a teacher-student conversation, because I think of myself as a teacher. People recognize of me as a teacher, hopefully a teacher that they can connect with, not just teachers in school and colleges that they tend to dismiss. And I wanted to then ride through that, because then I was hoping the reception they would have towards what the teacher says will not come from a point of dismissal. Because if I were their friend, right, perhaps a wiser one, they would still be at a point somehow we would say, all this is secondary information, and you haven't actually lived yourself this way. So what you're telling me is just something which is repurposed from someone else's content. But if the teacher is saying this, then there is at least hope in my head that people pay attention to it, because they're like, maybe the teacher has lived their life through this, and that's why they are in that way to share it. Okay.
So there's one more point that was important, like when you were describing, if I can look you up, and there's a lot of finance in it. And now I have this query because, most of us, like even for me, I think that we joined our first jobs and everything. And the first time we had to file a tax return, we were all so lost and clueless that we were running like headless chickens everywhere. I'm pretty sure most of us do it even now. Barely any of us knows that we should really get insurance. And then the other hand doesn't know, like, unless you have a bid in your hand to the restaurant. That's why everybody's panic says, oh, do we have GST? Do we not have? So I just want to ask you, how important is actually financial knowledge? And when I say financial knowledge, I definitely don't mean like very high-end knowledge, but this basic knowledge, especially for the younger generation that's coming up, because there's a lot of things happening. But we seem to have like absolutely none going on when it comes to actually even education system. And since you talked about the teacher factor, I wanted to know how most of us are also learning it online as opposed to from a structured system that teaches, if nothing else, to at least file our taxes. Right now, it's not even taxes fine. Most of us get so paranoid, you open the website, we're like, okay, I have no
clue. Shut it down. Yeah. No, it's a very valid question. And the simple answer in response to this is personal finance is a very, very, very important subject that we unfortunately are not taught and trained on. And money is not a conversation we have it in the families. Is the last thing we ever speak about. And not surprisingly then, the families that do speak about it tend to have very different mindsets towards it. So when you speak about, how was it that the Banya Toad is just so good with numbers and business? It's because that's how they think. And it's been a trading ground, which is not school and college driven, but family driven. Every conversation at the dinner table is about, okay, what do you think this business does? How do they make money? How would you think about making money? Blah, 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 blah. And so many such examples, not generalizing. The bigger point is we are raising an entire generation which is very aspirational. They're sitting on opportunities that none of us have ever seen in our eyes. They are wildly audacious in how they want to do things, how fast they want to get to, and they don't have the basics of money in place. So they recognize that if they don't have that, then it will be a disaster. And to their credit, they're ready for that information. And that's why there is information being created. Everything in my world at least becomes a demand-supply equation. And if there wasn't enough demand for such content, there wouldn't be enough supply of this content as well. So it's not a surprise that people are creating personal finance content because there are enough and more people who want that and seek it. And I'm happy that even if not in a structured college school environment, it's happening in some fashion.
Also simplified content, right? And not so much that you throw terms and then nobody understands what's happening.
And there's no examination at the end of it. Right? So, and I don't have to prove it to anybody. It's your money at the end of it. If you make sense of it, use that to gain. If you don't, use that to lose.
Well, the other way that I want to talk about, which is from your latest book, Get a Big Shit Done. And did you want to like stick to, okay, these magic words that sort of identify me from a first word to my first book? The other way that stood out for me was actually where you talk about career, and what you want out of it. I felt like this was a very significant point. Again, the people are starting to work way younger than probably, like you said, like this generation is picking up work way faster than probably we did because we'll be waiting at least 2 degrees and then we'll sort of move to the first job. And now people are doing, internships or retainerships side by side when they graduate. So one of the sort of advice, I know the one is called in the book, that you have is that, okay, first decide what you want, right? In the sense of, okay, do you want to want for lucky right now? Do you want to have a great team working with you, right? And then there's a moment when the student figure says that, okay, but I want everything. And there is this response that really means you don't really know what you want. But that is, I think, a lot of people, like when you say that, I want everything, that's, I think, most of us going, oh, I wish this didn't have to happen. So I think more and more people now are focusing, because earlier, again, let's say for women, the choice was like, you want a home or a career. Now we've sort of shifted, But even then, they're not very sure of what we want. We all know we should have careers. We should make money. We should pay our bills. I don't think there's still an acknowledgement about, okay, but what about that career? So I think that's still a challenging aspect, especially in India, where the jobs are still, okay, we've moved beyond a doctor-engineer dichotomy. We do have other jobs, but I still feel like there's still this lack of enough knowledge about, okay, there are certain jobs which are not on paper, let's say, like not defined on paper, but let's say the idea of creating content itself, which a lot of youngsters are taking. But even for them, they're like, oh, everybody else is doing it. Yeah, I'm getting money. Let me do it. There's no structure. So how important do you think it is to have structure as well, in your roadmap?
I certainly believe it is imperative for one to have it, but I also admit that it's not going to happen early on.
Right.
It's a journey. We've all admitted to that journey. I don't think anybody can short circuit that journey and get there faster. The point I'm trying to make whenever I have these conversations is, and I'm a student of the word why. Because if you were to answer why, you would get a lot of clarity in life. You may not like the answer, but it will be the necessary answer for you. Why am I doing this? Why do I behave this way? Why does this make me feel this way? No, blah, blah. So the question isn't how soon will you get to the why. The question is, are you always centered on the why? And you will over time figure that answer out through your mistakes, through your learning, through your relationships, through feedback, through whatever life throws at you. You will, if you are intent on finding the answer, get to that. And when you get to that, suddenly a lot of things just become clear. And it's very liberating to realize all these years, here is why I was doing what I was doing. And it didn't make sense at that point of time because I was sort of replaced, but now it does. And that's the book. That if somebody were to go to all the 36 questions in the book and their answers, I think there's only one thing that I'm frankly trying to suggest. Spend time with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And don't try and hide away from whatever it is that you are scared of realizing by seeking it in others. That's frankly the only thing. We don't know how to love ourselves, and that's why we seek love in others. We don't know how to make ourselves happy, and that's why we seek happiness from others. We don't know what to do with our money, and that's why we keep chasing money. We don't know what we want from our career, and that's why we keep miserable careers. But everything just centers around, we don't know why we are in it. And if we were to, things would just become very, very clear. It doesn't make it easy, just makes it very clear.
Probably I should know. What?
This interview was like throwing me in a completely different direction.
But that's what the best interviews are, right? It's not simply that, okay, I asked a lot of questions, and gave me, I get out of the room, and then, okay, that's it. I haven't since you have interacted with people directly, also through content creation and now through book. So what has that sort of meeting journey being like, well, people actually tell you, okay, I read this and this is what I did. Have you had people come up and say, really hate my life, at least now I know that I can go back to this as almost like a guidebook and okay, read it, and even if I don't like the answer, I can read it and figure, okay, yeah, I have to do it. There's no other choice.
Yeah, here's one thing I've realized about books, and perhaps you as well if you read them. You may read the book several times over, and every single time it will be a different book for you because of where you are in life, what you learned, what the book told you at that point of time, and what you're experiencing, and so many other different constructs. And that's what's fascinating about books, or for that matter, any content that you consume. So my hope is that these 36 questions are frankly the most frequently asked questions that people will have about life. But the answers will be very different for you each time you go back to that answer, depending on what you've learned and what you're going through. And that's why it's a book for keeps. And I'm not saying this because it's a little this way. If they were like, for me, Courage to be Decided is a book for keeps. I love going back to that book because every time I read it and I go through the entire Adlerian way of thinking, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. And I never thought of the way that I did previously. And this opens up new doors. And that's same for almost every book that I read again and again and again. So I feel that when it's not so much about getting the answer in that moment and saying, aha, something will here, I'm like said that. It's drawing some inspiration from it. Hopefully trying something out. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But say after 6 months or a year, you're struggling with the same thing and you come back to it and now you see the answer in a completely different light. And maybe you do different things from what you would have done.
So among the 36 frequently asked questions, which is now in a book, is there any aspect where you struggle the most?
I think the biggest one is the last chapter, which is how to become your best friend. I hadn't struggled with it, but I thought for the longest time that my best friend would be someone outside and not me. Until it hit me that if I'm my best friend, then nobody should be my best friend. Because then after seeking that solace from somebody else and that's a friend of them and both me. So it's something which was a beautiful journey that I undertook, and I'm so glad that I did that. And today I say it with 100% confidence that I am my best friend and there's nobody else who comes closer. I know my secrets in and out. I know my strengths in and out. I know my weaknesses in and out. I understand why I feel what I feel. I understand my emotions, my sentiments, my vulnerabilities, my sensibilities, everything. And that defines me. And there's nobody else who comes even close to understanding what goes in my mind and why, to the extent that I understand. And that sets me up in such a beautiful space because now suddenly nobody can touch me. Like if I know myself in and out as I do, nobody can touch me. Because nobody can say anything that I wouldn't know about myself. Even if that is hurtful. If somebody can say you're an asshole, so yeah, but you can say that. But somebody would say that. And if I truly am, I wouldn't feel bad about it because that is who I am. So suddenly it makes sense. But that's only when you become your own best friend. So that chapter is the coolest to me.
Okay, so this is my last question. So there's one thing that's thrown around very constantly, and I also sometimes agree with it, that the generation gap that we say earlier, it used to be like, okay, millennials, and let's say with me and my elder sister, you start that gap. Now the so-called generation gap comes after every 3 to 4 years. Even within ZC, we have like multiples of categories as you were. So what is, and yet your book is the one that's something that, okay, this particular, if I'm talking about generation gap, then let's say this generation should not have, ideally like it maybe. But then there is a sense that when it, at this point, that they're sort of giving advice in ways which are known to us, but we don't really know how to communicate in a language then let's say a different generation will understand. And that's where sometimes a lot of content gets lost because, we are so used to this is the way I have learned and this is the way I think is really great. So I want to sort of hear your thoughts about that. And do you think that gap goes primarily because even us as a generation that has probably slightly more refuses to sometimes sit and listen and we want to really talk more about?
Funny, you're absolutely right, 100% bang on. I think the biggest reason for generation gap is not because the generation prior cannot help the generation recent. It is just that their way of connecting and communicating is just so widely different that there is no connection bond. But if you give somebody an example, it's a very, very trivial one. my entire team calls each other bro, and I just don't get it because I'm not from that generation. Like, for me, bro is gender specific. It's not. And there are people who's like, dude, I call my mom bro. So it's like, now if I have to make that connection, the fundamentals of finance are not going to change. The fundamentals of how you think about career are not going to change. Of course, the opportunities may change and the models may change. But if I have to suddenly talk about fixed deposit not being a smart way of investing your money, I could be like the analogy in the house, which would be like, no, fixed deposit, sahi nahi hai, some joke, meri rice or no, mujhe pata hai zindagi kya hoti hai, blah, blah, blah. What happens like, bro, FD is not what you should be like. FD is shit. And you would speak in a manner that will be the exact same thing that you would have said otherwise, but in a way that they understand and receive, because that's how they consume. And it could be, again, wise video, particularly short form exploding, because it appeals to the attention senses of this generation. So if you have to create good quality content, you could either write a book, which a few hundred people will read. You could either shoot a 2-hour video, which maybe a few thousand will see. Maybe you record a podcast, which maybe another few thousand would. Or you create a reel or a short that suddenly millions would. Exact same content. But your effort now is not in so much what should I say, but how should I say it? And that, I think, just bridges the generation gap.
So I think these are wise words from somebody who's already under Forbes list of India top 100 content creators. Should I do it again? Sonic one. There's like doors running wide. So about these wise words from somebody who creates content all the time, and a lot of people keep watching it. A lot for actually financial advice as well. Even people like me who sometimes can't get back through. It's about this. You know him because he's in the top 100 Forbes list of digital content creators. You know him because the 2 epic books, which has the word epic in there. The next one coming out soon. Thank you so much, Ankur, for all of you. And this is Tina Das with Disha.